God bless you. This is session number 4, the call to missions. It's actually the calling of the missionary to missions, or the call of the church to missions, but really just the call to missions. And we don't have to wait to be called to get involved now. Remember, we're all commanded and commissioned to be involved in the mission. So when we say the call to be a missionary, we're really understanding that the call is to a specific person at a specific place doing a specific task, and that task has to involve making disciples. And so there's always specifics involved in being called to a missionary. And you do this, you could be a businessman, you could be involved in medicine, you could be involved in education, you could be a laborer, you could be involved in politics, at a certain area, specific place, but really being a part of the work that the Lord has set you on, which is to make disciples. But then there's the special type of missionaries that we are, where we are just basically working with the churches. We are working with the Christians and also looking to be used by the Lord to add to the church daily of those who are being saved. But we're going to look at Acts chapter 13. That's going to be our bedrock text for this session. Acts chapter 13. And we see really where we get our groundwork for the call to missions, as the missionaries are called and set apart. Acts chapter 13, we see in verses 1. Now there at Antioch in the church that was there, prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with the Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Verse 2. While they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, let's set apart for me the Barnabas and Saul for the work which I have called them. And then we see in verse 3, then when they had fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away. Verse 4, so being sent out by the Holy Spirit. I love that. We see that, first of all, that the call, it began with the church. That is, the church of Antioch was gathered together, and really they were worshiping and praying and seeking the face of God and fasting. It simply means that it has to start with the church. If you're going to be called to missions, you have to be a key part of the local body of believers. I believe that God works through the local body of believers, and He does this in a profound way so that we can be used to being a part of the body, working with others, and being dependent on others as we depend upon Him. But we see here that the church of Antioch took the Great Commission very serious. Not only were they the first church that's mentioned that send out missionaries, but really they were the first church that's mentioned discipling Gentiles. We see several Gentiles within this first verse that's involved in the church of Antioch. And these Gentiles, these individuals that are different ethnic backgrounds, different races. Simeon, who is also called Niger. The word Niger means black. He had black skin, obviously. And then we see also that Manaen was raised with Herod the Tetrarch, which simply means that he was had very Roman background, and as he was raised with one of the leaders of Israel. In the Roman government in Israel. And we see all these different individuals that came together and they were in unity. None of them were alike. They were in unity, and they are worshiping and praying, and they are a large part of the community, the body of believers there. And so if you're going to be involved in being called, if you really feel that you're being called into missions and that God's calling you to be a missionary, it starts with the body of believers. Ask yourself this question: am I a key part of my local body of believers? We see in Acts 13 that the missionary call started with the local church, a local body of believers. And we see that God didn't just call the willing, God called the leaders, the key important individuals. He called the best from that church. Paul and Barnabas was obviously the leaders of that area, that church, and God called them. And a lot of times we don't send our very best to do missions, and I think that that's something that we're going to have to answer for. So when we do missions, we need to think about it's got to start with the body of believers, and we see that the call to the missionary field started with there. Secondly, we see that it is recognized by the church. The church was gathered, worshiping and praying and seeking the face of God through fasting, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit spoke. And the Holy Spirit spoke and was very clear. Obviously, everybody heard it. It might have been through the tongues and through interpretation of tongues, is which I would believe, and those gifts of the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit spoke, and obviously everybody understood that it was God that spoke, and that it was God that was setting apart Barnabas and Saul, which would later be called Paul, for himself for work. And so the church recognized it. I want to tell you, if you're involved in your local body of believers and you say that I'm called to do missions, I believe that those who are closest to you has to recognize it. They got to see it. They really got to know that God is stirring you. God is moving in your life. God is really setting you apart for a special work for himself. I would have to say, being honest with you, if those individuals who are closest to you don't recognize it, especially the body of believers don't recognize it, then more than likely it's not possible at this point. But obviously that they were involved in the church, they were involved in the local body, they were involved in making disciples where they were, and then the Holy Spirit confirmed, and everyone recognized that Paul and Barnabas were being called into a missionary work. Not only that, but it was endorsed by the church. This is key. I'm a firm believer of the local body of believers. And we see that it started with the church, number one. Number two, it was recognized by the church. And number three, it was endorsed by the church. The church didn't just see it. The church actually partnered with the Holy Spirit in sending them. It says that they gathered around, they continued to fast and pray, and they laid hands on Barnabas and Saul, and they sent them out. And then in verse 4, it says, having been sent out by the Holy Spirit. So really what it says here is that the Holy Spirit is partnering with the local body of believers, and he's working in the local body of believers to accomplish his work. And when we're obedient to that, it's the work of God. It's not good, it's God. How many missionaries do you think has been sent out by the Holy Spirit? Because the church, it started with the local body, it was recognized by the local body, and it was endorsed by the local body. And it says that it was basically endorsed by the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit himself confirmed it, and he sent them out. And ain't that what you want? If you're called by God to do missions in a faraway place, in a faraway land, you got to make sure. It's got to start with your local body. It's got to be recognized by those who are closest to you, especially the local body of believers. And it needs to be endorsed by them. Not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, and monetarily. The church sent them out, but it was partnering with the Holy Spirit in doing such. So that's when we begin to accomplish great things for God. When we know that we're not doing it by ourselves, that we're in great unity with the people of God and God himself, and we're just being obedient. See, when the Holy Spirit stamps his name on something, you better believe that it's going to accomplish great things. The call to missions, well, it starts with the church. It's recognized by the church, and it should be endorsed by the church. That's the stamp of approval of the Holy Spirit.